Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. Welcome to tonight's session on personal branding with our very own Holly Boothroyd from Microsoft. Before we jump to the discussion, I would like to ask Holly to introduce herself for the benefit of the audience. Holly?
Right. So, hi, I'm Holly. I am a Microsoft software engineer too, working on Cortana and Windows. I've also worked on Paint 3D and Xbox. I am also the founder of Her Hello World, which is a platform that I created to kind of share my journey, help coach technologists, and really kind of dismantle the myths of technology. I mean, kind of the aim of making tech a more inclusive industry. So I get up to quite a lot in my daytime, but those are the kind of two main areas that I focus myself and my brand. And I'm excited to talk to you guys all more about that today.
Thank you, Holly. That was very succinctly put. Now, let's rewind to a time when you started university to understand how much of a role did Surrey play in helping you realize the importance of personal branding?
Yeah, so it was actually kind of around the end of university and kind of like my placement year that I really started to understand the kind of power and impact that a personal brand and an online presence can have. It was really, again, during that placement year that I started meeting other people, getting an idea of what the industry that I wanted to be a part was really like, and kind of understanding that if you have kind of your own platform and your own voice, that can really take you far in your career. And so kind of as I mentioned earlier, I was really passionate about these advocacy points of kind of making tech more diverse. And so it was a really nice way of kind of combining the advocacy work that I wanted to do and kind of building a reputation and a voice and a brand for myself into one thing, which ended up becoming Her Hello World. And so I started that actually just a couple weeks after I graduated university. So I've kind of hit about a 2-year mark on that. But it was, again, that kind of process of understanding who I was, what impact I wanted to make in the industry, kind of meeting the right people during my university journey that kind of started my kind of path around creating my own personal brand.
So, what was your inspiration? So, how did you start off building your personal brand?
Yeah, so I think like the most obvious thing is, I mean, like most people, I had my LinkedIn. I think everybody should have their LinkedIn if they're going to be kind of going out into this like professional world now. LinkedIn is a really big one. But that was kind of just the first step in kind of creating my online presence and creating kind of a personal brand for myself digitally. The biggest thing that I ended up doing was creating my Instagram page. And so that's kind of where Her Hello World started. It was a really easy place for me to just start putting out content, start kind of reaching and sharing what I thought was interesting and what I had been learning with others. And so my Instagram is probably the biggest place where my personal brand kind of really developed and is visible to others. And again, it was inspired by this idea of trying to help others while also having this intersection between my career. And so I've been doing this 2 years now. And over that process, I've kind of defined more about like simple things like my brand guidelines and kind of what I stand for and the things that are involved and what Her Hello World is. And from there, I've kind of just kept building and building and building. And so now I have more of a presence on Twitter. I have my own website for Her Hello World. And it's kind of being able to be this kind of central platform where my influence and voice can be spread out from there.
Right. So, since you touched upon Her Hello World, could you please tell us a bit more about that and what kind of inspired you to start something like that? And if I'm not wrong, is the name partly inspired by the programming syntax Hello World?
Yeah, so I'm obviously a woman in tech. There's not very many of us. And I was very fortunate to have these great resources like the ones at Surrey and even in my high school and on my placement at Microsoft to kind of help support me in my career and answer a lot of the questions that most people have when they're going into this industry. And so when I got to the end of university, I realized that I had all this information that a lot of people just don't have access to or wouldn't have access to or don't know where to look to even start answering some of these questions. And so it was a good place for me to just kind of share what I was learning, share the journey of becoming a software engineer, like a real software engineer in the industry. And so Her Hello World is, I tend to focus on women, but I speak to all types of people. It's not just women, obviously, it's minorities of all kinds, it's men, it's everyone is involved, but a lot of the issues that I focus on are specific to women going through dealing with the software engineering industry. But you're right. So the Hello World, it's one of those like classic things that you do as an engineer. The first program that you make is here where you type out Hello World to the console or print it on the screen. And so I thought it was a good way of kind of tying in the idea of like, right, helping people join the industry. It's targeted at women. And so again, that was one of those things that took me a while to kind of figure out the right name behind, again, the brand that I was creating. And so hopefully, for the most part, it's kind of obvious, again, who I'm targeting and kind of what it's all about. Like if you're in tech, you've done a Hello World program at least once in your life.
So is your website an extension of your brand, Hello World? Her Hello World, or is it something that you wanted to have so that you can kind of consolidate everything that you've achieved into one platform?
So I have two websites. I have one that's solely kind of focused on myself, kind of like my career, education, very classic portfolio kind of website. That one I built from scratch. And again, that was actually the first place where I defined kind of like even what like fonts I wanted to use, what colors I wanted to use, all of these basic things was done through that first personal website that I built. And now I have just sort of started finishing. It's not really fully announced yet, but it's live. My Her Hello World website, where that is a lot more focused on Her Hello World, what kind of like writings that I have about different things, where I have my coaching, testimonials, like all of those sorts of things. It's kind of separated into that, and those use same kind of colors and formatting and kind of file across all of my platforms that like this is what if you're talking to me and looking at my things, this is what it looks like and kind of what it represents. So I did try to get some kind of consistency across two websites, even though they are a bit separate.
Right. So since you spoke about your websites, could you please give us a breakdown as to how you went about building it and what kind of inspired the user interface? You said that you wanted to keep it consistent, but what was your starting point for that? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so I did a CS degree at Surrey, and I learned CS and web development and all of that at university. But in my job, I do not do web development, or at least I didn't. And so it was a really good way of me kind of building up my skills and having something to show for it. So I started with a really simple idea of what I just wanted it to look like. I did some investigations online of other people's websites that I liked, looked at Pinterest, things like that. Had a basic idea, and then it was just kind of chunk by chunk trying to get out kind of what I considered my minimum viable product, and then being bold enough to basically release it. I would say with stuff like this, it's really easy to kind of get caught up in the idea that it has to be perfect before you put it out, or that it has to have every feature or every single bug that needs to be fixed. And I find with things like that, nothing ever gets done and put out. And so I try to set myself a really clear line of like, okay, once I hit this point, then it is going to go live. And I can now iterate on it from there. So at least I'm getting something out there. Like if I had waited until to like create Her Hello World, the Instagram page, until I had done my website, or waited until my website was done to start coaching people, then I would be months behind. I wouldn't have even started. And so now I'm able to kind of fill in those pieces as I have time and as things kind of become more important. But it was really just an incremental process of understanding kind of what, like bringing my vision to life in kind of the simplest way I could.
So how do you think your website is different to everything that we can see on LinkedIn? What additionally does it offer? Or does it tell about you as a person, as a professional?
Yeah, so I think the nice thing when you kind of start defining your own space is that you can really show off your own personality and what makes you unique and special. And so a lot of the stuff, like there are some similarities, but I can also kind of show it off in a way that I think is most visually appealing, or highlight the things that I want to, or include things that I can't really include on LinkedIn. So like I have a lot of like speaking. So I put a lot of my speaking events on my website, and I put stuff where I've written in on my website as well. So at least it's kind of just one quick stop shop place for all of everything about me, basically. And I do end up linking out to my LinkedIn on my website in case you just want that classic formal view. But I think it's a nice way of kind of getting to know a person through their website. Everybody's is a little bit different, and you can kind of understand a bit more who they are by seeing how they have decided to brand themselves.
Now, do you think that if each one of us have our own website, do you think that will kind of kill the unique selling point of having your own website?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where everybody gets a degree and then suddenly degrees are worth less. But at the same time, I think there's real value in it. You're still always going to be getting those benefits. So, like for me, again, it was a place where I could curate everything about myself. I could learn while I was doing it. It was easily shareable, things like this. And so, yes, obviously you're going to stand out maybe slightly less if every single other person has a website, but then there's kind of this creativity that you can have and being like, how are you actually like selling yourself? How are you, like, what are you doing to kind of make yourself stand out? Because there's loads of ways to have a website. Like mine is actually probably one of the most like basic ones you can do, but it made sense with my brand. One of my other friends, she also has her own website. It's completely different. It's designed as like a Windows Vista operating system. And so like hers is super creative, unique, special to her. Really, you get to know her really well. I mean, it's great because she's a web developer. And so she can really show off all of those skills. And so it makes sense for hers to be like that. And so I think there's lots of creativity and flexibility as you're creating these things that are supposed to be to represent you, as they need to represent you and not someone else. They need to stand out for you.
Now, for someone like me who has a non-tech background, is it still possible to have a website of the same standard as you have? Can I still do it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I decided to create my own from scratch because I wanted to learn development. It's, if you actually look at my code, it's very simple. So anybody could make my website. In terms of if you're trying to come up with something like maybe a bit more clever, or you don't really want to do any programming at all, then there's loads of software out there that can help you do that. So my other website I made, so for her Hello World, I couldn't really be asked to write my own website. And I also wanted to learn WordPress. And so I ended up building that website on WordPress. And it's been really useful because at least like I can now iterate really quickly. I can use share code that other people have written, things like that. And just suddenly, again, you do a couple little adjustments, add your text, and you can really focus on creating something, again, that represents you, but without any technical experience.
So, how much of conceptual knowledge do you think helps in the creation of your personal brand? Like, for example, branding strategies, marketing strategies. Do you think these theories have actually helped you, making your personal brand? And if so, do you recommend any books or resources?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I obviously come from a tech background, and I guess I've come with a little bit of marketing background because I did a couple classes at university, but not really. So I would say a lot of the stuff I've focused on is stuff that I've seen that just works with other people. I do a lot of kind of analysis on like I understand what works for my network and how they're growing, and kind of solving things as I kind of come across them and going to talks and things like that. And so I think there's a lot you can learn by just absorbing what is around you. And so from a conceptual standpoint, there's certain things that I tried to pay attention to, like the colors I was using. I looked up color theory and what they actually meant. So I was kind of putting across the right kind of feel when I was doing that. I pay attention to things like like good composition on my photos and good composition on my websites, and everybody loves a nice animation. And so there's certain things like that. But in terms of like my brand, I've really focused on kind of a couple key things. And so for me, it was really kind of identifying my niche and what I wanted to be known for. And so this took a little bit of time of understanding, okay, like what unique value can I add? What experiences that are different that people would benefit from hearing about? What gap in this market can I fill? And so this is why people start paying attention to what I have to say or what I put out, is because this is my niche and this is what I'm known for. The other thing is I suggest always kind of focusing on your passions and like being really genuine with what you're putting out, because it takes a lot of work to build like a proper brand like this. Like it's very easy to create an online presence through your LinkedIn, do some basic engagement, posting every once in a while, and that will be more than if you had done nothing. But if you want to really build a brand, it is an encompassing idea of like who you are and what your complete online presence is and how you represent yourself. And so this kind of showing your passions and being genuine really matters, not just in terms of like how you come off, but also in your commitment that you're going to put towards building your brand. If you're passionate about it, you're going to want to do it, you're going to do it better, and you're going to do it quicker. And the other thing is like, we all know collaborating with others is a great way of kind of building up your brand, your following, and like kind of leading to these other opportunities. Like that is the really nice thing about building a brand versus having a kind of a simplistic online presence, is that the opportunities will come from it because you are known for something and you have created an actual voice for yourself where people want to listen. And so once you start doing these things, these kind of collaborations are a lot easier. Engaging with the right communities, the right networks, bringing it up when you're in person is like also a big thing of kind of disseminating that information about what you're all about. And so those are the things that I really focus on, is finding my niche, being genuine and passionate about it, and kind of collaborating and connecting with my community.
So you spoke about your niche. What exactly do you think is your niche?
So when I started my page 2 years ago, there was basically 0 women in tech Instagram pages.
Right.
That is not the case anymore. It's really skyrocketed in the last couple of years. And so it was nice for me to be able to kind of get in there first and start defining who I was. I think the other things, when you start looking a bit deeper, things about where I've worked, the fact that I am an American living in the UK, so I have experience working in both countries. That's really useful to people. I talk a lot about kind of experiences with imposter syndrome or career building or things like that. And so what my page is becoming known for now is kind of sharing my journey in an honest way, and also being able to kind of provide this helpful, actionable advice for people to be able to find their version of success. I think it's really important that people focus on their own version of success as opposed to this kind of grand idea of like what success actually means. Because I think more and more, and especially as the world gets crazier and crazier, that we're finding that people just aren't very fulfilled by their work. And so if you're able to kind of find that intersection, like I kind of mentioned before, between your work and your passions, I think you'll end up being a lot more successful. And so that's what I kind of talk a lot about on my page. And it kind of helps me stand out amongst the millions of students also sharing their journeys.
So over the years, what exactly do you think was your secret sauce in terms of scaling and sustaining your social media following?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to the same key points of kind of understanding what my niche is, understanding who my community is, like who is following me, and kind of engaging with the other community that is now out there. So like at the end of the day, the whole point of this, or at least a massive part of this, was making sure that tech was being inclusive and that there were more women being represented. So for me, I'm just personally really excited the fact that there are more women out there running these pages, because it's just great to have that kind of visibility. But in terms of kind of maintaining my own and or continuing to grow my own platform, a lot of the stuff I've kind of been focusing on is making sure that the content that I put out is kind of relatable and relevant. So I try to plan the things that I'm posting or sharing about with what I know is happening right now. So there's a big push about lots of internships applications are happening at the moment. And so I've been doing a lot more things about, here is how you should apply. These are the secret kind of tricks that you should know about kind of like timelines or connecting with recruiters or all of that kind of stuff. So I make sure that the stuff that I'm putting out is really relevant for the time that we are in now, and getting feedback from the people who are following me about what they want to hear. Like that's just like the easiest one, is just literally asking people what they want to know about, because they're automatically going to be engaged if you're speaking about something they care about. And so at the end of the day, it's not super complicated. It takes time, but it's like you're putting out content that people care about. If you're saying things that people are interested in hearing about, and you're doing it consistently and genuinely, then people are going to just be interested in what you have to say.
Often it's quite difficult to find your own voice because, many people say the same things as you, and it really takes a lot of time to kind of identify your own community and so on. And what you have done with building your own online community is amazing. And since you spoke about having women thrive in technology, I'd like to ask you a question about your role as a board member in Microsoft. So you're a board member at Microsoft to champion the cause of helping women thrive in the tech industry. So how are you leveraging your personal network to steer this initiative?
Yeah, so that's actually a great one where I do use my network quite a lot. So what's nice about Microsoft UK is that it's obviously part of the wider Microsoft, but is a small enough subsidiary where you can have big impact and know lots of people that are in this part of the company. And so I do put a bit of attention and focus on making sure that my network stays really strong within the company, and that I have connections outside of just the engineering section of the business. And so it becomes particularly useful because a lot of what we're doing is kind of creating events and spaces and opportunities to learn and connect with each other. And so for stuff like that, it's really great to be able to amplify internal voices at Microsoft. And I'm able to do that because basically I know what people are about. I know what those few things they want to be known about as well. And I can invite them in to kind of speak to us or run workshops, things like that. And these kinds of things are really great for retention of people and bringing new people into the company, because we are quite well known now for having really good work culture. And that is kind of one of these big things, is like the employee resource groups, like the Women at Microsoft group is. That's what they're really there about, is kind of building these communities and using your network to kind of help each other. We're all there to kind of help each other succeed. And so if we can put on something and you leverage the knowledge of one of our team members and share it widely, we're all going to be doing better for ourselves, for our gender representation, and for retention within the company.
So what do you think makes it very difficult for women to enter the tech industry or the financial services industry? What do you think is stopping them? Or what external forces do you think is stopping women from entering these competitive industries?
Yeah, so you have to start looking all across like the kind of career and education pipeline, because there's lots of blockers all along the way. And each one of them kind of needs a slightly different approach or technique or advice to get through that. So one of the biggest ones is, and I hear this a lot from people who follow me, is that literally just the encouragement that they're given, the advice that they're given when they're young, is to not do tech, that you're not smart enough, that you don't know math very well, and that means you're not going to be successful, or that even here that the school doesn't offer it, but the boys' school does. And so it's these kinds of things. And one of the things that I really enjoy getting involved with at Microsoft is a program called Digi Girls, because it specifically targets kind of the most, I don't want to say vulnerable age at which it's like 12 to 13-year-old girls. And it's around that time that they see the biggest drop off of interest in STEM subjects. And so we invite them in, do some really cool stuff, show them some cool technology. And by the end of the day, these 50 girls who have no interest in technology or what the industry was about actually ends up coming away being like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. Or all the myths that I had been told about or had heard from the media and all of that are just not true, or are out of date. And so that's one big thing, at least just, again, trying to get people through to any kind of education system that is, right? So you don't need to go to university to be in tech. Apprenticeships are a great option. And a lot of the time what we find, particularly for women, is they get experience in technology or programming after university while they're in their kind of first couple roles, and so end up completely retraining to be computer scientists afterwards, through using boot camps and online classes. And so it's kind of making sure that people are getting the education that they need and the encouragement that they need. But afterwards, then you start talking about, like, once people are actually in the workplace, you start talking about things like manager support, kind of internal like bias, lack of kind of like promotion opportunities, things like that. And that's sort of what the Women at Microsoft group focuses on, is actually dealing with those issues that people run across once they're actually in a workplace, so that women don't leave, basically, because what you end up finding is a lot of women end up 5-10 years down the line, end up just not finding what they want, and so change industries. It's a big deal. There's lots going on.
Absolutely. So I think that was a very interesting insight, because I was about to ask this as well. So I come from a very non-techie background, and even with that initial disadvantage, would it be possible for me to make technology a full-fledged career?
Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Like that's probably most of the people that follow me on my page, maybe not most, but quite a lot of them are non-technical, maybe come from a different STEM subject. Like that tends to help, just because of it's about a thought process at the end of the day. Like, a language is just a language. You just learn how to do it. But the most important thing at the end of the day is how you're thinking and your problem solving skills. And then the programming is just a tool to get it done. So I know a lot of people end up getting really intimidated by this idea. But again, once you start getting those theory and those concepts down, it becomes a lot easier. And then you're able to pick up a bunch of other languages, because the concepts are the same. The thinking is the same. Just what you're typing is a bit different. And so this is one of those kind of funny things, is this industry, you can't actually just come in without a degree, with almost like limited experiences in some cases. It really depends on what part of the industry you're going into. But I do know a lot of people who have done boot camps, online classes, they've done online courses or like in-person courses with Code First Girls. Like that's a great one if you're a woman. And at the end of these, they're able to get junior engineering jobs, which is great, because that's the kind of thing that starts changing people's lives and long-term impacts. It just takes a bit of perseverance, really. It's just perseverance, that's all. You just have to have the patience and perseverance to actually make sure that you're getting it done. If you're not coming from a university background, then it's a lot more on you to kind of self-lead your learning.
But is self-learning that easy with something like learning a new coding language? Is it possible?
Yeah, so there are some really good online courses. I tend to, whenever I'm trying to teach myself something new, so like recently I learned React and TypeScript. I did an online course on Udemy. They're pretty much always on sale, so you can get courses for like £10. something like that. And they're really handy because, I mean, I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with online learning now. Like, it is totally possible. Like, you at least have essentially what is a teacher kind of guiding you through this. You have a Q&A section that you can ask questions in. They give you homework. Again, it's all self-guided time, like for your timings, but they are really, really good at teaching you the concepts that you need to know. The other one that I use sometimes is EDX, because they partner with a lot of really big institutions or companies to kind of run these classes, and you can get certifications at the end. So I did one on natural language processing with Microsoft. Again, free. So it's totally possible.
So guys, I hope you're making a note of this. Holly is sharing a lot of wisdom here. Udemy EDX. So please check this out and start learning your new coding languages, because I think coding is the most relevant language in this time. People don't care if you know English or Spanish. They're like, do you know coding? Because that really sells in today's world. So great. Thank you, Holly.
I think this is the funny thing, is at least with programming, it seems like pretty much everybody I know now needs to have some kind of programming. I know bio people, business people, all of them, once they end up getting into their role, they end up having to do some kind of programming. And then I get a text message asking me how to teach them Python or something. So it's worth brushing up now, just so the concepts again are familiar.
So Holly, I just want to understand a bit more about networking, since you're quite good at it. Now, given such unprecedented times, I think the traditional route for applying to jobs doesn't seem feasible anymore, because it's like submitting an application to a black hole, because you never get a response. So in that case, do you think that it becomes a networking game? Do you think you have to reach out to the key decision makers to help you land an opportunity?
Yeah, and honestly, I make this a recommendation whether we're in a pandemic, virtual or not, because at the end of the day, what makes you stand out is that network. We know that most jobs are filled either internally or through your network, and so you're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you aren't trying to get yourself known to the right people. So the kind of obvious first place to connect with is, like, once you fill in your application, is to connect with the recruiters on LinkedIn and send them a message, because at least it gets your name in their mind, and they'll be a lot more familiar. They'll be like, wow, that person was like really keen, and look, I'll check out their LinkedIn for everything else that they have going on, things like that. And especially if you connect and then you post about stuff, then they see that you're posting, and it's kind of this passive engagement and connection kind of relationship that you're building. So LinkedIn's a really powerful one. But if you're going to kind of take it that next step further, and this is really where your network starts to become super useful, is if you know someone in the company, or especially if you know someone on that team, then I would absolutely reach out to them and ask, basically, like, can you pass me on to the hiring manager? Because the hiring manager is the one that makes the decisions. And if you can get yourself, again, like, their eyes on your name, your CV, that is going to make the biggest difference. I know a lot of people who have gotten their roles from using basically just their network. So if you're not doing it, someone else is. So I would definitely suggest trying to pull on whatever connections you have, going to events, reaching out to people, trying to build that up. So when the time comes and you need to use it, it's ready, and it doesn't feel so disingenuous to just connect with someone and ask for a favor. Like, that's not really how networking works. It's about building relationships so that when you do need help, they are willing and wanting to help you.
So one thing that people normally don't know is that how important is networking once you land the job. So let's say you're at Microsoft now, and how important is it to network with your employees, with your coworkers, in order for you to be more visible?
Yeah, so I set up calls with people all the time. I have probably 4 or 5 people that I meet with semi-regularly, and they're on all different parts of the business. And I even connect with even a couple of my teammates. We have one-to-ones just to even catch up and kind of see what's been going on in their lives. And because again, it's about maintaining this relationship and making it so that, I mean, it's real. You want to help your friends. And it's really nice to kind of know what is happening in other parts of the business. And especially a lot of the people I connect with are also really keen people involved in advocacy work. And so we're able to kind of combine our efforts or find crossovers and help each other out a bit. I would say is a good thing to do, especially because all of those people that you might know at one institution, so like all of your friends at Surrey, they're all going to go somewhere else at some point. And so in 2 years' time, now you have a connection at IBM, you have a connection at PwC, you have a connection somewhere else. And so it's worth kind of keeping those relationships and building them up, because eventually you have a massive network that can be really useful for even just like little things. Plus, you're always learning from them. So I maintain my relationships all the time. When I have opportunities to meet even with my leads, so what they're usually based in the US, and when I went home last, I ended up meeting with my corporate vice president because I sent him an email and I figured I might as well try, and it worked. And so now who I am is way more visible to him. I made a book recommendation. He really liked it, sent it to all his leads and gave me credit. It's these kinds of things where it's like, if you're putting yourself forward, bringing that personality, bringing that extra bit of knowledge that you have, you can start kind of showing up, being more visible and getting those extra opportunities.
That's amazing. That is so unique. I've never heard anyone say that before. But thanks for sharing. So I just want to go back to your website. So I just want to understand how important is call to action on your website, because you can say a lot of things, but if you don't have evidence, it doesn't hold its ground. So what do you think is the importance of call to action?
So do you mean call to action as in like send me an email, or do you mean like here is my actual portfolio, like this is something I need?
Now, for example, if you go to your website, I think you have mentioned that you've spoken at a couple of places. So it's amazing how I can just click on it and see what you've done. So I just want to understand why is that so important? Especially when you want to create that personal brand.
So for these, like for that example specifically, again, it was all kind of about putting all of the information in one place, so that regardless of what you were kind of looking for, you understand what I do in this industry and the impacts that I'm making. So the speaking one, especially, I am trying to increase the amount of public speaking I do, and people do reach out to me for these things. And so a lot of the time what you need is examples of your speaking. If you're actually going to get people to hire you to speak and pay you to speak and get those bigger opportunities, a portfolio is super useful. Understanding how much experience you have is super useful. So a lot of my speaking, I link out to, if I have a recording of that. If I've done any writing, I link to the piece that I've written. So it kind of builds on this idea, like I can start building my reputation. You can start seeing for yourself what I'm all about. So I think it's really important to actually, I don't know, substantiate your claims to show, if you can, like show it. Like I don't have recordings for everything, but if you can show something that is really useful for those people who are looking to offer you an opportunity, because they need to know what you're about and what you can speak about, or they need to know what kind of development work that you've done in the past, or what kind of writing, or these are your topics of interest. And so kind of labeling them and making them really obvious for people, because a lot of the time people don't have any time. And so it's important to make sure that it is clear and accessible and skimmable as possible.
Right. So one last question before we move on to the Q&A. So now let's say that I don't have a website and I don't use LinkedIn that much, but I still want to be attracting these opportunities. Do you think it's still possible? Or do you think it's only possible if I have a strong online persona? Like you said.
I would wonder where people are going to reach out to you. So things like maybe you have a Twitter. And for tech, that's a particularly good place to have an online presence. A lot of people don't really use Instagram, which is fair enough. I was aiming, that was my market, was regular people just going about their day kind of. And so I wasn't really expecting to get maybe a job offer through my Instagram. But other things come through my Instagram and different opportunities. So again, I get speaking opportunities from that, or features, or blah, 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 right? And so I would ask yourself, how are people going to reach out to you? How do people know that what opportunities they should be offering you? How do people know what you're all about? Because if you just have an email, then no one's going to have any way of like knowing what it is, knowing how to contact you. So I would say a LinkedIn is a very minimum bar these days. It doesn't take very long. And the nice thing is you do it once, it passively works for you. Everything after that, you just have to update at the same time that you update your resume. So if anything, my LinkedIn is more updated than my resume because it's really easy to add a couple things and then move on. So while at least I don't have to change a document. But again, I highly recommend everybody gets a LinkedIn, especially if you are applying for grad roles, internships, placements. It's a very important thing to have, to be able to connect with those recruiters, connect with those team members, even see what opportunities are available and be contacted. It's minimum.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for the discussion. I think I really learned a lot from this conversation, so thank you so much. Now let's move on to the Q&A. I think our audience is quite eager to ask you some questions. So we have one question here. So this is from Janvi. Okay. So Holly, could you please expand on the time commitment? How many hours a week would you suggest committing to building your personal brand?
So I think it depends on what you're doing. And again, with all of these questions, if you send me a DM on Instagram, then I'm able to kind of help you specifically. But with certain things, like my Instagram does actually require a lot more time for me to do, because that's kind of the expectations of the platform. So I probably spend, I don't know, 6 hours a week on it, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. But then if we think about, okay, I need to post probably minimum 3 times a week to have any kind of consistent engagement. Taking photos takes time, writing content or like the captions take time, engaging with other people take time. And so it's like, it is a commitment. On the other side, if you're not kind of doing that regular, I have very quickly learned that a plan is great, except for that something is probably going to change. And so kind of being able to maybe plan backwards, but make room for flexibility, having those expectations set for flexibility. So then you're not disappointed, you're able to iterate, you can be agile in this way. And so the suggestion that my CVP said to me that was, I think, is a really important thing to learn if you're kind of, or remember if you're kind of like me, is it gave me a cricket reference. It was like think about everything that's happening over the next few years, right? There's a lot going on, but really you should be focusing on kind of like the 2 years that are in front of you. So yeah, have a plan for post 2 years, but make sure you're kind of, he said, head in the sky, boots on the ground. So you can have that plan, but make sure that you're really focused as well on kind of initially what's in front of you, so you don't miss those opportunities that are here, because at the end of the day, what you're being judged on now is not necessarily what you're being judged on later. So to give an example, for me, I want to be a leader at Microsoft. That means I need to eventually do more business things, public speaking, hence why I like to practice, all of these different things. But at the end of the day, what I'm being judged on right now is my engineering skills. And so I need to continuously improve my engineering skills, improve my architecting skills, all of those things, while also in the back of my mind, paying some attention to those kind of high level things. So boots on the ground, head in the sky, and finding that intersection between your passions and your career are probably the two best pieces of advice that I have had.
Super. Thank you so much. Question number 3. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome? If so, when? And how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so this one is a funny one. I talk a lot about this these days. I did not even know that there was a term, imposter syndrome, until a couple years ago, and it made me feel so much better knowing that there was a term for it, and that so many other people were experiencing it as well. So for those who don't know, imposter syndrome is basically this kind of like the feelings or thoughts that what you've achieved is because of maybe a bit of luck, not necessarily due to your talents. And it's a really common thing, especially for minorities and industries, because there's not only are you dealing with lots of really intelligent people when you go to the workforce, you also have these inherent bias against you, and it's always kind of in the back of your mind. And so for me, probably the biggest time I dealt with imposter syndrome was over my placement year. I'm a big Microsoft fangirl, and so I really did not want to disappoint Microsoft when I finally had my opportunity, and I was the only female intern. And so the first few thoughts in my mind were like, oh my God, I'm a diversity hire. How am I supposed to possibly, they've made a mistake hiring me, all of this kind of stuff. And it took me a little bit to kind of figure it out and kind of feel a bit better about myself. But the kind of main things that ended up helping was I started focusing on kind of building my skills and building my knowledge. That's just a given. Everybody is constantly improving. And if you're smarter or you know more, then you're going to feel better. But also it was kind of this idea, time and time again, I deliver something. And it was this idea that even if I didn't know how to do something at the start, I would be able to figure it out and deliver it by the end. And so the thing that comes back to me time and time again is not just this knowledge that I have, it's actually the fact that I have trust in myself to be able to deliver what is kind of asked of me, even if I don't know. So I have trust in my ability to learn. And especially in an industry where you're constantly learning and growing and doing new things, that was probably the most powerful thing for me. It was just starting to increase that confidence in myself. I do a whole talk about this. If you are interested, then it's on my YouTube. I re-recorded a talk I gave at a Microsoft conference all about this. But the other things I'll just quickly is it was building community confidence. So kind of building that reputation and visibility on my team, making sure that I felt like a full member of my team, not just an intern. And also then kind of reminding myself of basically my success or the things I've been able to accomplish. So it was building that individual confidence. And so that community confidence and that individual confidence is really what helped me. And knowing that imposter syndrome isn't something you just overcome once and move on. it is something that comes back. And you can use these same techniques to kind of overcome it again, or like silence your inner saboteur, or kind of at least manage it in a productive way. And one last thing I'll say is, another powerful thought that came to me was realizing that my imposter syndrome was actually helping me in my career in some ways, because I was able to identify the things, again, that was unique to me, my strengths, how I work best. And so I could feed all of that information back into what I was doing and focusing on my career in such a way so that I could amplify my strengths and kind of like work on my weaknesses where they were. So for me, I think my imposter syndrome helped me. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but it gave me a lot of self-awareness and understanding of who I am.
That's what I call turning something negative into a positive. Amazing work. Amazing.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So this is a very interesting question. I think I should have covered this in the discussion, but I forgot to. So what would you tell Holly, the younger Holly from 5 years ago? What advice would you give her? Yeah.
I feel like I've grown so much in 5 years. I don't know how to narrow it down. I think the big thing for me, especially as I was joining this industry and it was so competitive and everything else, it was focusing a lot more on myself. So I happen to run in a lot of circles where there's a lot of people who have done amazing things, and it was hard for me to necessarily feel like I was accomplishing as much or feel confident in what I was putting out. And so I think the biggest thing for me over the last few years, and especially since leaving university, is kind of realizing essentially as soon as you leave university, everybody's paths kind of separate in some way. So all the people that I knew the exact same information at the end of university, we all know totally different things now because we've all grown in the areas that are relevant to us. And so there's no way of comparing side by side. There's no way of comparing your journey to someone else's, comparing your success to someone else's, because what your version of success looks like is going to be different from theirs. What your unique value is going to be different from theirs. The challenges that you face are going to be different. And so it's so important to just focus on what you can provide and what unique value you have, because that's really what is going to get you to where you want to go, not what this other person wants to do, what you want to do. And this on, again, my unique value, my version of success that I think has been one of the biggest growth points for me. And I wish during university someone had told me this then, so I could kind of stop worrying about what other people were doing and focusing more on what I was doing.
Right. Oh, that's amazing advice. I wish I could tell myself the same thing 5 years ago, because I was also very competitive. And I think my version of success was, getting the materialistic things. But then, over time, you kind of realize that it's about recognition. It's about the intangibles that actually matter to you once you grow older and wiser. So I think that's really good advice. So we have one more question. Do you think that the coronavirus would affect personal branding? If yes, how?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and I've had a few discussions about the kind of impacts of coronavirus, and I think this is an interesting one from my experience. Honestly, I've not felt much of a disruption. If anything, it's probably easier to build a brand now because it's very easy to build like essentially what you would now be doing in some ways. Like its foundation is building an online presence, which you can still do. The difference between, I guess, in a normal time was that you can then take that online presence and what you kind of fed into it and embody it. And so it's this kind of embodiment of your brand in the real world that kind of, I guess, brings the brand to life. But that being said, there are still ways now of sharing your personality, sharing your words. Honestly, I have not gotten a decrease in opportunities since the pandemic has started because so many things are virtual and have been able to successfully transition into being virtual. And so I think as long as you are using the technology in the right way, and starting now, this is a great time to build a brand. And especially if you can do all this foundational work of getting your online presence set up, then it is going to be ready for you to take advantage of when we get out of this mess. So there's no time like the present. Again, like, do what you can do now. Don't feel like everything is not perfect and so you shouldn't bother starting. There are so many things that you can do on your computer that starts to build out that brand. And I've seen a lot of people while we're in the pandemic do some really amazing things with theirs because they're just putting in the work and they're really like focusing on what that makes them special and just doing it.
Thank you, Holly. And I just want to know one more thing. So, in times of adversity, like the pandemic, is there someone that you look up to specifically? Do you have an inspiration as such?
Ooh, I feel like there's a lot of inspirational people that I follow. In terms of a specific person, I think I've just really been inspired by the community that's around me. I think I've been really impressed with kind of everybody's show of resilience and creativity that's come out of this pandemic. I think when we have situations like this, just sort of around, just like how we did with the 2008 recession, a lot of creativity is inspired out of constraints. And so it's been really interesting to see how everybody has been responding, seeing how people are still putting out these amazing things, but also focusing again inwardly and understanding what is really important in life. And so I think while maybe it's not necessarily been a single person that's inspired me throughout these recent times, I think it's kind of this collective movement that we're all kind of a part of, trying to make the best out of the situation and still trying to push towards our goals, even though our plans have vastly changed in the kind of an unexpected time frame. So I've been honestly, like, pandemic aside, I think I've been really impressed by what people have been able to achieve over the last few months. I don't think for a lot of people that it's going to hold us back in terms of what we're able to put out because we have so many resources available through technology.
So, in your view, what are some of the skills that are so underrated in today's time?
The what are underrated?
In your view, what are some of the skills
yeah.
that are
So for me,
underrated in today's time?
I know a lot of people call them soft skills. I call them professional skills because I think they deserve more credit. Your professional skills, so your communication, public speaking, collaboration skills, all of these kinds of things are super valuable. And it's really is going to separate you from everyone else, especially as you get in the higher levels. There's lots of people who are very technical, but there's not very many people who have those great technical skills and can communicate well or work cross-discipline or do all of those things. And so once you start getting beyond your initial couple levels, it's not about the work that you can produce yourself. It's about the kind of wider impact that you can make, the influence that you can have. And so I think if people, again, kind of how I'm doing is trying to build these professional skills up alongside my engineering skills or whatever technical skills you might be using in your job, then you will be ready and you can start taking advantage of them when you need them. Because at least in tech, it's very obvious when you don't necessarily have those. And so especially in technology, it can be a real superpower to have these strong professional skills.
Cool. Thanks, Oli. Our next question is, how important is personal branding, especially when you're an entrepreneur?
Ooh, especially as an entrepreneur. I mean, I said at the start, I think it's incredibly important. I think it's kind of really what has changed my career over the last few years. I can't even imagine what I would be doing without having created Her Hello World. It definitely would have been a very different experience. And especially for entrepreneurs, I think it's going to definitely matter to investors and to other people, kind of who you are, what you stand for, how you work, these kinds of things, they all impact those decisions, whether or not they're going to pay attention to you. And if we take someone like, I've only ever seen her last name be written, but her name is Kiki. She started BYP, which is, I think it stands for Black Young Professionals. It's basically, as they call it in the media, like Black LinkedIn. It's a networking application plus more. They run conferences and events for Black professionals, and I think it's mostly focused in England at the moment, but that is a startup. And Kiki has a massive kind of personal brand, online presence, and she's really able to build up her business by focusing also on herself. So like that's how I first heard of her app, was through Kiki and through what Kiki was doing, not through just hearing about the app on the underground. And it's kind of her personality that's involved. Like I can see how passionate she is. I can see how much growth there is. I can see how much change she's willing to make. And it gives me kind of faith and excitement about what she is building. And so I've invested in her app now. It's very exciting. It's went public. But yeah, I think it's really important. I think it can make a big difference for anyone.
Absolutely. And I think one of the questions that we had was around mentorship. How important do you think is finding the right mentor? Because a mentor can either make you or break you. So in your journey, have you seen or have you had the opportunity to work with some really amazing mentors?
Yeah, so this was one of the big things that inspired me to start Her Hello World, was because I had some really amazing mentors. So I had two at Microsoft. One, he was on my main team, and the other was this incredible woman who started getting me really inspired about women in tech advocacy and like being a lot more proactive in my involvement in it. She was also the one that helped me get my job at Xbox. So again, this is kind of using that internal network and using those referrals. But so I would say it's super important, especially at the start. I think it is really valuable, at least having another opinion, another perspective, someone that comes with maybe a few more years than you or understands the wider situation a bit more. And I think these are great things to have to kind of keep you thinking about the next thing. So like I still meet with the same mentor that I had when I was an intern every couple weeks, and he always gives me really interesting things to think about, insight into what's happening on the team. And I can definitely credit him with some of my successes because he is kind of providing me that additional understanding and knowledge that I'm able to take advantage of. So I always kind of say, I think somewhere between maybe 5-10 years older than you is a good kind of age limit, or like not necessarily even age, but level difference than you, experience level. Because then it means that they're close enough to you to understand what you're going through, but far enough away to kind of have that perspective and have learned and grown from it. So I kind of get a mix of mentors, and there's a lot of different places you can find them. There's a lot of outreach programs that just in the community. If you just search up online, a lot of people will have them internally at their companies. And honestly, just even reaching out to people that you think are helpful and asking to have a coffee or one-on-one, ask a couple questions, see how it works, and then just asking for them to be your mentor and meeting with you once a month. Most people are usually pretty flattered and will just say yes, or will be able to kind of point you towards someone who might be a better fit or might have more time. So I definitely recommend it, especially at the start of your career. It made a big difference for me, and it still does.
But do you think that finding a mentor is an organic process, or is it something that you need to persevere towards? you need to put in the effort to get one?
Yeah, so my first mentor, I was assigned. He was my just intern buddy, and that worked out really, really well. I think that there's been other ones that I've had through formal processes, and they were okay as well. So I think it really depends on who the person is, and this is sort of why I say that if you're going to reach out organically to someone, just ask them a few questions beforehand, kind of get a feel for kind of their mentorship style, what kind of advice they give, because it's just a bit easier to not just going straight with like, well, I think you're cool and you should be my mentor, and then realizing later you don't actually really want them as your mentor. You can kind of get into some like awkward situations, and so it's easier to just and understand who they are a bit more. So I think that you can find them in organically, not. I think it really depends more about the individual and making sure that you have trust in them to be kind of open and honest about what you're going through, because if you're trying to hide from this person, they're not going to be able to help you in the same way. Like I have to be quite vulnerable with my mentors, so they are able to kind of guide me in the right direction and know what I'm actually going through.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And I think we have time for two more questions. So the first question is, what are some of your top time management tips?
My top management tips. Time management.
Yeah, time management.
So for me, I always plan backwards. Again, it's coming with that planning point of view for me, especially things like coursework. This is a great example. I always mark when the deadline is and then figure out exactly what I need to be doing every single day to kind of hit that deadline. I'm not one of those people who leaves things the last minute. I also don't like crunching. And so if I can kind of reasonably do it over time and know by the end of the day that if I have accomplished what I've set out to accomplish, I'm going to finish on time, that relieves stress for me and makes sure that I'm always on track. I think the other thing is as well is understanding how you work best and even when you work best. So like I quite like getting all my work done in the morning. I know some people who are night owls and they'll work all through the night. But kind of understanding how you work best is super important. Yeah, there you go. And I think this isn't really a time management thing, but this is more of a focus thing. Honestly, noise canceling headphones, the best. They seriously make a massive difference in being able to actually focus on what you're doing in front of you. And especially if everybody's like at home or at university or wherever, and there's lots of distractions going on, having like some actual focused time in front of you is really helpful. So you can get done those things that you said backwards, getting some real focused time. That tends to be how I manage my time.
Thank you. And the last question is, so Holly, so you've been, I think, promoted twice or thrice within your time at Microsoft. So obviously, putting your performance aside, what other factors kind of contributed towards your career escalation?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing with that one was I was always very aware of what I needed to be working on. So I was very clear with my manager right at the start exactly what my goals were for each of the years. So I was promoted twice in 2 years. That was my plan. I don't really think I'm going to get promoted a third time because it's just not really as possible in 3 years. But I knew it was possible. And so I set the goal and kind of an expectation with my manager that this is what I'm working towards. Now, every single month, we're going to be reviewing exactly what I need to be doing and changing or improving on to make sure that I get there. And so the nice thing, at least at Microsoft, is they have a careers guide. So there's literally a list of things that you're supposed to be doing to get to be at that level and the next level. So we go through those, make sure that I was kind of hitting those points, getting that feedback and being very proactive about kind of, or active at least, responding to that feedback and abiding by that feedback, because otherwise nothing changes. And it's difficult during those, you're doing it in such a short amount of time. A lot of the time when they're looking for promotions is you have to demonstrate that you're doing these things over time. And so you have to be quite quick to respond to these things and quite consistent. But it just meant that when it came time for my actual reviews, I knew exactly what was going to be said because I already knew my growth areas. I already knew what I was doing well at. And so it was a pleasant surprise, but it wasn't that surprising because I knew what I was working towards, and I knew that he knew I was trying to get to that level as well. So that's, I think, actually making sure you are proactive with your relationship and leading the relationship with your manager is important. Your manager is there to help you in your career. That's one of their big responsibilities, is helping you succeed in your career. And so kind of holding them accountable for that and really being clear with what your expectations are, I think really helped.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Holly, for taking those questions very sportingly, and thank you for your time. I think today
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I'm a learned man. I've learned a lot of things about personal branding, about your experiences and so on. I think it was very insightful, and I can say the same for the team and the viewers. So thank you so much. And
Thank you.
and yeah, so do you have any comments about the event? How did you find it?
No, this was great. I really enjoyed all the questions. It was kind of nice talking about my journey and different things that I hadn't really even thought about myself. It was a really good experience. And I would just say, again, if anybody wants to send me a message, have any questions, whatever, my DMs are open. Let me know that if you're in this call so I can make sure to filter and prioritize. But again, my Instagram is Her Hello World, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Holly Boothroyd.
Super. Thank you so much. And guys, our next event is on the 27th of October. And this time we're going to be talking about how to secure a placement with JP Morgan. So stay tuned and we'll be back. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.